super on board with that. I think what I'm trying to figure out is on the other side, like for me, I'm a young father. We got a few kids. We got someone living with us. There's other people in our lives, and trying to do life on life, as many layers as possible. How do I do that and also be careful as a father to not be not doing justice to my family? What does that look like in protecting the core family time while also, like, part of this is like you're pulling people in to become your family too. So yeah, there's a question in there somewhere.
Good. So Heidi and I don't have biological kids. Joe has 5 kids he doesn't claim though.
Dang.
But so.
It's joking.
It's a joke.
I just want to make sure.
Yes.
But what I would say is what we've learned from, what's that? Oh, okay.
Wow.
What we learned from other couples who do have children who are doing similar things is thinking through how do we engage bring both worlds together as much as possible. As a husband, my first responsibility is my wife, right? And then if I have children, they're in there as well, right? The qualification for an elder is that your house needs to be in order before you can care for others, right? But I think there's ways to, again, not everyone is called to have people live with them. We are all called to be hospitable. And so inviting people over for dinner, our good friends Angie and Dahadi in Atlanta, they talk about how they prepare their kids to host company. So the kids, sometimes the older kids, sometimes will prepare the meal, they'll set the table, they'll work out questions to ask even before the company comes so that the kids are engaged in that. So they're discipling their kids at the same time as they're opening up their home for other people, inviting them in. So you definitely want to see how you could try to bring in both worlds. We don't want, they always say pastor kids, right? Minister kids are the worst because they feel that the parents have abandoned them for the sake of others. And we would never want to be those people, right? And so our children, our spouses need to know that they're primary in our lives. So if you could bring those two worlds together, that'd be great.
And I've heard them also share that they talk about, we invite other people into our regular rhythms of life. We don't shape our rhythms based on other people. So it's like, if I have young children, part of my rhythm is bedtime rituals, right? So, it's like, if you're at my house and it's time for my kids to go to bed, well then, you're welcome to stay, but it's bedtime at our house, and we're gonna just do bedtime, and I'll be back down when bedtime's over, and that's showing to them, to your company too, the value of your family and how important they are to you, and you're not saying you have to leave, but you are saying, from this time to this time, this is what we do, and we'll be back down, make yourself at home while we're gone. And that's just kind of showing them hospitality at the same time, saying my house is your house, we're gonna be upstairs for 30 minutes, make yourself at home, you want to get something to eat, you want to watch TV, whatever you want to do. But yeah, making sure that you are comfortable with your own rhythms first and invite people into that rather than trying to conform your rhythms to somebody else.
Joe, you want to add in your next? No, I'm just kidding. Next question.
Joseph, I think we were talking yesterday about, I guess it's for anybody, but I think you said something like, in a sense, you're like your father's disciple in a sense, and then, Ryan's discipling you. So I'm just kind of curious how, if you're going to try to disciple someone, just how to not, step on people's toes, because it's like, obviously, like a parent is, sense, kind of like the role model or something, and it's like it's not like you're replacing them, but it's like, how does that work out where you don't offend someone and say, oh, well, you didn't do right up it, just pick up the broken pieces, but more just like, I guess, meekness, or how does that balance play out with that kind of?
There's so many different areas, so many different scenarios where relationships will cross over. I can try to give a couple of examples where they will cross over. So one would be discipler and discipler. So like there's a lot of times you'll have like sort of one person who's drawing somebody in or drawing somebody into the fold and trying to disciple them and grow them in Christ. And then somebody else may step along as well. And we shouldn't see that as, I remember one particular, when I was in Chicago, me and JP, John, we were both walking with the same dude, and it wasn't as if, like, John felt like, well, no, that's my disciple, not yours. Like, I want time with him, that type of thing. I see it as when Jesus says, go make fishers of men, I'll make you fishers of men. I think the analogy that we can see is not like the analogy that we see today, where you have one line, one pole, throw some bait out there and wait for somebody, wait for something to bite. But rather, it was a group of people who threw out a net and drew the fish in together. And so, this idea of like, when we're being fishers of men, I don't think that it's supposed to be one person ultimately that's discipling one person. You will see that it's actually better when more people are involved in discipling. So you have multifaceted, they can hear the same wisdom again in different ways. When I was in Chicago, there was a guy who was at Parish. Brian has been walking with this dude. Brian and Heidi have been patient with this man for so long, and I moved in, and I became sort of a voice in his life as well, trying to walk him as well. And we were sort of tag team, and Brian would tell me, like, hey man, talk to Parrish about such and such, whatever it may be. It wasn't as if I was stepping on, even though Brian was much more like a father figure to him and had been walking with him since he was like 9, maybe. It's not as if, I come in and be like, all right, yeah, however I can be a part of being part of that, I think ultimately Christ would want us to be grouped. So that should spark even other ideas when you're talking about making disciples. It's like, yeah, I may be the one person who trying to draw somebody in. That doesn't mean that I can't bring other brothers or other sisters alongside of me who will be able to walk with him as well. And as far as like familiar relationships, I think you just kind of see it the same way. It depends on if their father or mother is a believer or not. That's a different aspect as well. But even then, it's still like, I'm coming alongside to help you. It's not a competition. And I think when you come with servant hands versus like wanting to be served, come with your own agendas of what you think this should look like, it's rather saying, like, I know that this is your son, I know this is your daughter, I want to come alongside of you and help you do this. I know that even if they're troubled or whatever it may be, like, I just want to help. I want to be a help, and what does that look like for me to be able to help you? And so having that mode of Jesus, of, I didn't come to serve, I didn't come to be served, but to serve, I think that kind of eliminates some of that competitive spirit as well.
I wonder if you could talk to the kind of the discernment process of, like, 2 Timothy 2:2 talks about find faithful people to invest in. Just a little bit about how you guys, as a group or a home, kind of walk through testing people to see if they'll be faithful before you invest a bunch of time and energy into that person.
Yeah, so 2 Timothy 2:2, Paul's challenging Timothy, right, as an elder, as a leader of a church, to entrust himself to faithful men, right? So the idea is my time is precious, my time is limited, and so there's only so much that I can do, right? And so if I have to be focused on raising up a new generation of leaders. I think that also needs to be balanced though with if the one sheep goes off, right? Are we willing to chase after that individual? And so I think there's a difference between investment in somebody, right, and trusting ourselves to somebody, but at the same time being willing to go after those individuals who don't show themselves faithful, right? The bulk of my time has to be spent with those who are faithful, Again, the Joe Solomons and so forth, those who show up when I ask to meet. And so what I do for my discipleship, because I work a full-time job and I pastor and I wear a bunch of different hats, my discipleship time is at 5:30 in the morning. If someone shows up faithfully at 5:30 in the morning, I could count on them being faithful, because most people just aren't going to do that, right? And so there's some people who are like, yeah, I want to be discipled, but that's too early for me. And then, well, that's the time I have available, right? So I think making it a bit of a challenge for an individual, you know, not to always flex around their schedule, but asking them to flex around yours, especially again if you have kids, you have a family, and so forth. Assigning homework, you know, I want you to memorize this verse for the week. If they don't come back with it memorized, you know, maybe let them slide once or twice, but eventually, like, my time is valuable, you know, my time is limited, and so until you're ready for this, you know, maybe we should just put it off. And so yeah, you know, having assignments I think is a good thing, because again, we can't, we have to invest in people who are going to be a return on their investment. Does that answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an ambiguous question. We've all had people that we swing and miss on, we invest a lot of time in, you feel sad about that, or burdened about that, because you want them to know Christ in a deeper way.
Okay.
But then there's, you don't want to be legalistic about, and not full of grace towards people that are trying to grow, but life circumstances get in the way. You know, I'm just thinking of people in my life where you might make progress for a little bit, kid gets sick, the car breaks down, they get evicted, they're transient, and life is unsettling. So to ask someone to come and say, hey, I need you here at 5:30 in the morning, for someone who's pretty stable in their life, like they can maintain that, and that, I feel like that's been a okay litmus test for a challenge. But for people that are facing other challenges in other areas of their life, how do you approach that? Like, how do you lead with grace, but still encourage growth?
Yeah, I would still challenge us to raise the bar and not to lower the bar for people. Showing up at 5:30 in the morning at a certain time, right, is a pretty basic thing. And so I've got a guy who 3 weeks in a row, he said his alarm didn't go off, right? And so it's sitting down with him, having a serious man-to-man talk. Hey, Daquan, you know, it seems like you're now wanting to meet. Yeah, his name's Daquan Lynch. So
wow.
That's on video too. You can let him know. Yeah. Was having a serious talk with him, you know, trying to find out what the heart was, what was going on, because I know that anyone's capable of setting an alarm and getting up. And for him, he was vulnerable and transparent with me and helping me understand some kind of shame that he was dealing with, and just him being concerned with how I would respond to what was going on in his life. And so in that, there's sensitivity, right? Maybe I find out that, you know, their father was drunk last night, right? And he was beat on, right? So you obviously ask questions, right? Figure out what's going on, but I want to continue to raise the bar for the guys that I'm walking with, and again, I work primarily in a inner city broken kind of community, so I've kind of worked with homeless to teenagers to adults and so forth, and I've seen people rise to the challenge on that. Questions?
I'll ask, it could be for you or for Heidi, and maybe go deeper into what he was asking as far as like when is the time to, when you, somebody you've been walking with for maybe months, maybe years, and think there's some fruit, and ain't no fruit, like when is the time, like when is there's too much grace or too much patience, or whatever, or if there is too much grace or too much patience? Can you answer?
The reason he passed the mic to me is because this is the most gracious guy you will ever meet in your life.
Oh, I do too.
So he is very, very slow to sever relationships, and I've learned a lot from that because I'm a very black and white person where it's like there's a right and there's a wrong, and if you're doing wrong, then that's it. And 3 strikes and you're out. Like, I'll give you grace once, might give you grace twice, but the 3rd time, that's it. And so being married to Brian, I've had to really learn a lot about Christ's love for me. And he's helped me to see how much grace I've received from the Lord, and that's really helped me to extend grace to other people. As far as a time to cut something off, cut a relationship, like a discipleship relationship off, man, that just requires a lot of prayer. Because those relationships are precious and they're investments. And so making that decision, you do not want to take that lightly at all. And just because you stop discipling a person does not mean that you don't have a relationship with that person. You continue to love them, you continue to speak to them, reach out to them, text them, that type of thing. But the frequency of the amount of time that you spend together may just be less. And therefore your investment is less. Now the door stays open. So if they start to rise to the occasion again, they come to a different place in life where they might be like, okay, now I'm ready. Then that door is open and come on back. But there does reach a point where it's like, okay, I think this is not the time for us to continue to meet. We can continue in relationship, but not in a discipleship relationship.
I'm sorry. Hey, so I kind of grew up in a context where discipleship didn't exist. And so as I kind of grew in my faith, I realized, oh my goodness, this is important. This is a huge part in our faith. And so my question is, how do you kind of change a culture where discipleship doesn't exist? Like, how do you get from getting people to see the importance, not just in their mind that we got to make disciples, but how do we collectively as a group, as a ministry, as a church, make disciples?
I think you start with where you can. You do it yourself. You model it to others. I think when people see the fruit of it, and it might take years, right? But they see the fruit of it, they're like, oh, wow, look what he's doing, right? So we just gotta be faithful. I mean, Jesus didn't try to work within trying to convince all the Pharisees and the religious leaders, hey guys, the discipleship idea that John the Baptist is doing is a good thing, right? Jesus just called disciples to follow him, right? And so I think the same thing again, you know. Don't get frustrated with your church, you know, because they're not doing discipleship the way that we think it should be done. Like, see the benefits and the strengths of that church, right? Because all churches have strengths and all churches have weaknesses, right? There's no perfect church. And so don't grow frustrated in that. Appreciate the good things from the church, but at the same time, again, realize, okay, but I see in scriptures that this should be happening, right? And so if it means there's one guy who's maybe a little younger in the faith than you in your church or in your neighborhood, you just take under your wing and you just invite them to follow you, right? And you start teaching them scriptures and so forth. So start with what you have right now.
I got a question real quick. When you're thinking about discipling youth specifically, and this is open to anyone, just thinking about child development in general, but then also someone who's professing faith, how do you, for instance, if you start walking alongside a 10-year-old kid, they're not going to be like, yo, I want to follow Jesus, disciple me, please. But how do you know at what point is it like, that same question he was kind of asked in the sense of, all right, I shouldn't be spending as much time with this specific youth, or maybe I should be spending more time with them because they need more love. How do you base that when it's talking about a child or a youth who maybe not be able to communicate that or even understand kind of what's happening in that regard, if that makes sense.
I think out of the three of us, I've probably done the most work with younger children. So, yeah, it's hard with kids to really know where they're at spiritually, because they will say whatever they want to please you. So you may think that a kid is excited about living out their faith because they come every Sunday and they never miss a Sunday and they love learning about the Word, but you have no idea how they live after that. You know, like outside of Sunday, what does their life look like? So I think the best thing you could do is by being a consistent person in their life throughout the week and not just on Sundays. And sometimes conversation happens in the strangest ways. With kids, they're just all of a sudden it's like, oh. And so spending time, authentic time with kids, I think the questions that they ask are more telling than what they say. Because what they say is going to be just to make you happy.
My question revolves around how you actually start up a discipleship relationship. How official do you make that? It's kind of like a DTR, define the relationship. Like, what does that look like? Do you hang out with somebody for a while and try to see if there's a relationship connection there, and then at some point do you say, all right, I'm inviting you to meet with me at 5:30 every week or whatever? What does that process look like?
I think it varies. I mean, for me, I went on probably 5 or 6 dates with Heidi before she sat me down for the DTR, you know? I was like, what do you mean? Why do we have to talk about this? Like, isn't it, like, why do you think I keep asking you out? So, that's me, okay. So there's individuals that have been more forthright from the beginning, and there's other relationships that have just kind of formed over time. Joe, I don't think I ever said I want to disciple you, you know?
Actually verbalize that you're not like discipling, so that's his negative sarcasm.
Are you still hurt by that?
I am. Man.
Do we have any counselors in the room? So, but I think it just varies. Again, how your personality is, and you know, the individual and so forth. So I don't know if there's a right way to do it. Heidi might have another answer.
No, our disciple, the person who discipled Brian and I, he would say every discipleship relationship starts with hello. So it's simply, you know, getting to know people and spending time with them, and then over time, all of a sudden you turn around and that person's like, you'll hear them in conversation say, Brian's discipling me. And you're like, oh really? Okay, I guess that's what this is. You know, so that's kind of, we're all about just organic relationships. Now there are other people in our church that I know who will intentionally go up to someone and say, like, would you like to start walking life with me? With kind of the idea of come and follow me. And they are comfortable doing that, and that's fine. For me, I'd rather have somebody ask than me ask. Because every discipleship relationship that I thought was going to be a good relationship hasn't always been the best. Because, you know, it's much better if Jesus picks them for me than I pick them myself. Because, you know, I may be like, oh, this looks like it's going to be an easy one because they're already walking with the Lord. They're already strong. And so, yeah, I'll take that one. But this one over here, that's going to be a challenge. Oh my goodness, she has a lot of baggage. So, you know, which of the two am I going to choose? Well, I'll spend time with both of them equally and then see if they even see me as someone that they want to learn from. Because I don't like to force those relationships. I think they're much more effective when they happen naturally. And so, you know, sometimes I do have girls approach me and say, will you disciple me? And other times I'll just be like, hey, let's get coffee and talk. And then we just make a habit of getting coffee and talking. And eventually we start studying the Word together. And then, you know, one thing leads to another, and it's a discipleship relationship.
Yeah, I don't think we have to make it like, we're like the courtship language that we use in church, where it's like, so what are we? And it's much like like a friendship would be. Like, I don't like ask my friends if if we're friends. I feel like if we've hung out after a while, it sort of kind of happens. So I think the first time that I didn't even know I was in there, like I was discipling this guy. I didn't really have a lot of language. I was making disciples in Texas. I didn't really use the language as often as discipleship until I got to Chicago. Really, it was just young dudes that I just had a passion for being in young dudes' lives, and they would come to me, and then sometimes I'd be kind of pursuing them, and sometimes they kind of be pursuing me, like, hey man, I want to hang out, can we get up? And it was just like, yeah, and it just kind of became a frequent thing, just finding who draws to you, like Heidi said, if Jesus would lead them to you, and it just kind of happens. I think in some ways, I think it gets more like specific when people are older or in the faith already. So like if you're like in the faith and want to be discipled by somebody, or you want to disciple somebody further who's already in the faith, that can be more a specific language. But like somebody who's an unbeliever, they're not going to be. They're just going to want to be showing up. There's something about you they like. There's something about your family that they like, and they just want to be around, and it just kind of happens.
I think Joe actually just made a really good distinction, because when Brian and Joe yesterday were talking about disciple-making relationships, it's often thought of that you disciple someone after they become a believer, but I would think we would agree that the discipleship process actually begins pre-coming to the faith, because you're already walking with this person, and then when they come to the faith, it changes the dynamic, but really, realistically, you've been kind of discipling them all along. And so some people would say, well, that's evangelism, that's not discipleship. And we're in the camp of, we would kind of lump that all together as one.
Yeah, because, when did the 12 disciples become Christian? It's like, it's hard to know exactly. It might have been even after the crucifixion, and resurrection, honestly. And so was Jesus not discipling them for 3 years? Questions?
Yeah, I wasn't here yesterday, so I apologize if you already talked about this. Yeah, I was running an event, so that's okay. I'm glad that there's different representation up here, because I feel like most people I've heard about discipleship are men. Do you do it any differently, consciously or unconsciously, when you disciple different genders?
Yeah, we encourage discipleship to be same gender.
Yeah, I just mean your methodology when you're doing it.
Oh, okay. No, I think we pretty much have the same idea of how we do it. We usually start off leading, just really hammering home the gospel, making sure that there's a really good understanding of the gospel, engaging where they're at in that process. So I think both of us do that. And then usually after that, I kind of do an intense questioning of the person to find out where their areas of struggle might be, and then we'll do some sort of book study, whether that's a book in the Bible or a book about that specific issue, based on what kind of comes out of that. So that's the general format of how I disciple, but it looks different for each person depending on where they're at spiritually and what their struggles are. So if somebody comes to me and says, will you disciple me? I'll say, well, what are you looking for in a discipleship relationship? Because not everybody has the same terminology of what that looks like or what that means. So that's really the first question that I ask is, what is it that you want, or what are you desiring? And then once I hear that from them, I'm able to gauge, is this person looking for just some support in marriage? Is this a married person who just wants somebody to talk to about their issues that they're having with their spouse? Or is this a person who, might be struggling with a specific sin issue? Or is this a new believer who just wants to know how to study the Word of God? And so I'm going to approach all three of those differently. There's no one size fits all. I would say for me it's different.
Yeah, so beyond just gender specific, it's individual specific, kind of shaping it around where they're at and what they need.
Well, I guess for me and myself, I have the ability to overextend myself in situations. So how do you guys avoid getting burnt out, especially like in the living situations and in the space all the time? And like, how do you avoid just getting burnt out?
So I'm an introvert to the extreme. So I think I can't remember if I said this earlier today to another group or whatever, but my view of ministry is that I want to work out of rest, not rest because I've worked so hard and I burnt myself out, right? And so we need to have rhythms of Sabbath, right? Sabbath rest. And so for me, it's between Fridays and Saturdays are usually my lighter days where I might be working, but I'm working by myself. You know, I'm responding to emails, doing whatever. And for me, that's rest, right? I have my time usually after Heidi goes to sleep, where is my time with the Lord, because I'm more of a night person than a morning person. So you got to kind of know yourself, how you're wired, and making sure that, again, you're resting. Because if you find yourself getting burnt out, you know, it's because you've had unhealthy habits for a while already. And so we don't want to be people who burn out because then you're no effective, you're no good. And you really you're doing work out of your own strength, out of your own might, instead of out of the strength of the Lord.
Oh, I was just going to add, I was actually just part of my Devo today of just kind of pointing out how Jesus had a kind of similar language, saying rhythm, a very common rhythm of interaction and solitude. So we see when Jesus is constantly, he's never like always with the crowd, nor is he never always alone. It's like a constant back and forth. He went away, he interacted. And so it's just the same rhythm of Jesus is interacting in solitude.
And I was sharing with somebody earlier today too that for me, evening time is not my rest time because we always have people at the house in the evening, and I know that. And in order to prepare myself for that mentally, my time of rest is 7 to 10 a.m. That's when I take my time with the Lord. That's when I exercise. That's when I do, kind of time for myself. I try not to plan meetings before 10 a.m. So that's kind of my built-in, as you would say, like rest time. And so you have to find what that time can be for you, because if you're busy doing ministry in the evenings all the time, then maybe that's not your time. You got to find something else that works for you.
This is my second question, so I don't know if there's a quota for passing it. I'm just wondering if you guys can talk about some of your failures, or I don't want to use the word regret necessarily, but just some story or something that comes to mind, ways that you failed.
We don't have any failures.
I'm just joking,
Well, it's hard to define failure because we see that even though a person may feel like a failure, we know that God is still at work and their story is not finished. So there's a really difficult situation that we're dealing with right now, and it appears from the outside as if it's a failure. It's a young man that lived with us, was like a son to us, known him since high school, and got married a year ago, and is just having a lot of issues in his marriage and possibly headed towards a divorce. And so that feels like a failure because he lived with us. He was like a son to us. And so it's very fresh and real and raw right now. But I think we're really trusting that the Lord is not finished with him yet. He who began a good work will carry it on to completion. And I'm really believing that if he truly is the Lord's, that the Lord is not going to let him go too far without pulling him back in. And we've seen that happen over the years where time passes, and maybe it won't be for another 10 years. And that person may come back to us and say, you know what, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. We may see that, or we may never see that, and the fruit might just be in heaven. But just holding on to hope that the Lord is still at work in that situation, even though we can't really see it right now. And I could tell you a million stories of where that is the case.
Quickly going back to the point of like no church is perfect. If you see something or hear something within the church that doesn't quite sit right with you, it'd be a plan of attack, something you just go back home and pray about, or something where you might want to talk to somebody at that church, or just something within the church, things that are not always perfect that might not sit well, how you might handle that.
I'm trying to get the question.
I believe the question is, so if you are in a church where you see issues that you just may have some disagreement or whatever on, how do you handle that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Just something, maybe a verbiage or an action within the church that might not sit well. Is it something that you always voice right away, maybe you just pray about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biblical principle is that we first take the log out of our own eye, right? So that we can see clearly to take the speck out of our brother's eyes, right? So I always want to start inwardly, like, okay, it's easy for me to see the wrong in other people. And to think that I've got everything together. I know how church needs to be done, how discipleship needs to be done, and so forth. But when I'm real with myself, I see, I mean, Paul, at the beginning of his Christian journey, he said he's the least of all the sinners, of all the apostles. Later on in his life, he says he's the least of all the sinners. And so you get this trajectory of Paul seeing himself not becoming more and more righteous, but more and more sinful. The greatest of all sinners. And the idea is, as we grow older in the faith, we should see more and more, because initially when he gets saved, he take care of the big sins, right? Like, oh, I stopped, murdering people, and I stopped, having, that's a pretty big sin. So Joe just stopped like 3 years ago. And we somehow think that we got it all together now, but again, there's an indwelling sin within us. And I'm like, man, this lust is still here, this hatred is still here. And so I think we have to see ourselves again as the biggest of sinners, right? Personally. And so that gives us a humble heart with it. So then when we come to somebody and we bring something up, it's in the midst of, you know what, man, I got a lot of mess in my life, and I need your help in this area, I really see that I'm very judgmental, I'm very proud, and can you pray for me, can you hold me accountable in this area? And then also I have a question, and I think even using it as a question, right, helps, because again, what we perceive may not be real, I'm just wondering about this. Can you help me understand why we do this as a church? Why this happens and so forth? And they may have a real good reason, Well, I wish we could do X, Y, and Z, but we just don't have the staff or the time or the bandwidth for it, right? And that again, because you come now humble and asking questions, you're able to understand, right? And then you can hopefully come back with okay, man, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe this is the way I could help in this, right? And so now you offer yourself up. So again, approaching first individually, checking our own hearts, realizing our failures, and then coming as a learner to the table. Because that's just another thing about being young, right? When we're young, we think we know everything, and then when we get old, we realize we know nothing. So just being humble in our approach.
My question is, so going back to discipling unbelievers, or even people that maybe claim to have been a believer for a long time, but they decide they're done. If you're still walking with them, but they don't necessarily want discipleship, but they, you know what I mean? Like, do you have any tips on how to continue pouring into somebody that doesn't necessarily they're not convinced on the gospel right now, and they're not at the place where they're like deciding to follow Christ.
Yeah, I think that's kind of similar to the question of like, how much is too much patience type thing. Not the same question, but in the same vein of kind of like there is a time where I think that you kind of have to dust your feet off, and you may be able to continue a relationship with them, but it's not in a way like this message that we have. It's a precious message that we see. It's not something that we have to try to sell to someone. We got to be some type of salesman about it. Like, we have a precious and glorious message, and if you don't want it, I'm not going to sit here and try to force it onto you. If you keep coming in my space, then yeah, I'm going to share that. But after a while, I'm not going to keep, like, if someone is continually wanted nothing to do with what I'm saying, and they're sort of pushing me away, and there comes a time where it's like I don't have to sell this to you. Like, I've said everything I have to say about it, and you have to pray that the Lord would, maybe change your heart, bring you back into that space. And so, yeah, that's kind of
those relationships in certain situations.
I think that we want to, in order to clearly give the gospel and live that out, but I think we should be able to show our weaknesses, because otherwise it shows as if like there is a point in a Christian life where you will become perfect, and in order to be a good Christian, in order for God to love me, I have to be this perfect Christian. And I've done that with a lot of people. Okay, I'm talking about parish, that's another thing. Like, it just kind of showing like there are a lot of people out there. As much as he's heard the gospel, he still has this idea in his mind that as soon as a Christian does something wrong, and it's like, oh, you're not a Christian. Like, well, that's not the gospel. Like, the gospel is that we're saved and kept by grace. That we are saved from our sins, and also being able to war against and have victory over our sins only by grace. It's not some type of thing that we muster up in ourselves. And so I think that people can see that more clearly when we're more vulnerable about where we are in our space, as far as, whether it be sins, whatever it may be. And you have to use discretion on what that looks like from relationship to relationship. Because I know sometimes you may feel like you may be even encouraging sin in some way by being vulnerable about a particular sin. Like, I don't want you to think this is okay. But in some way, like, there is a constant thing of showing, like, even just on a parental level, think about that. Like, my father would apologize to me when he did something wrong. And that was always like paradigm shifting to me when it happened. Because it was like, Dad's perfect. Dad don't do nothing because he's an adult and he's reached a point in life where he's perfect. And it's like, no, Dad apologizes because Dad still makes mistakes. And so, Christian, you still make mistakes, and you're a discipler. Like, I think that then it will allow them to see you more, just human. But also, long term, it helps them because eventually you're the discipler. But at one point, you do want them to be your peer. You don't want to lord over them. It's always, I'm always doing things better. I'm always ahead of you. At some point, you want that disciple to be your peer. And they'll never be your peer if they can't level with you, if they can't see themselves in you and see that, oh, we're on the same playing field. So I think that helps look long term for them to be your peer as well.
And I would just add to that, it's really important for them to see you have victory over sin, because it encourages them that they can have victory over sin. So if they know you're struggling in a particular area, it allows them to pray for you, which is really powerful to have that kind of prayer support. And then also it shows when you do have victory, you could share that and celebrate together so that they know that they too can have that same kind of victory over sin.
We have time just for a few more.
Hi, I've been discipled for a long time, so first and foremost I want to just say thank you for your faithfulness, and God bless each and every one of you. Thank you. I know how that is to walk with someone. So as I'm discipling few of teens that I know now, My question is, how do you keep yourself accountable to not, how do I say, control? Like, I feel sometimes I have to catch myself, and I have to be careful that though I'm discipling, I'm not God in their life. And I have to be careful not to control or get mad when they don't do something the way that I want them to do it, when I want them to do it. So how do you guys kind of balance that out?
Yeah, I think it's constantly reminding us of exactly what you said, that we're not God. And you know, the sower sows the seed in the field and he goes to sleep. And he wakes up and the seed starts to grow, he knows not how, right? God does the work. And so I think it's seeing, again, the long-term picture, knowing that Jesus walked with Simon Peter for 3 years. And, you know, the night of his betrayal, he tells Peter, stay up and pray, watch and pray, right? He goes to sleep, comes back. Hey, Peter, watch and pray, right? He goes to sleep. Hey, Peter, one more time, watch and pray, right? And then he tells him, you know, Satan's going to sift you like wheat. You're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, I'm not going to deny you 3 times, you know? And of course he does, right? And yet, after Jesus Christ dies and resurrects, he meets Peter and the other disciples, right? And they're out on the boat. They gave up the ministry. They gave it, you know, they went back to fishing. And Jesus is on the shore cooking up breakfast for them. And Peter sees them, right, and starts to swim towards Jesus, comes to shore, and Jesus again has this breakfast, and he welcomes back into the family 3 times. He asks them, you know, do you love me? Feed my sheep, do you love me? So forth. And so having that long-term mentality where, again, God is going to do the work he wants to do, and it's not going to be in my time frame. Last night we told a story about a guy who lived with us for 2 years. 8 years passed before he came to Christ. And that was without us having any interaction with him in that 8 years. God will take the seed that's been planted, and he will bring other Christians in that person's life if he wants to. And he will awaken that heart when he feels it's time to awaken. And so we have to trust God's time in it, and know that even if I'm just a part of this process, right? Some plant, some water, God produces the harvest. I've done my part. I'm convinced that there's people that we've ministered to over the years, we may never see on earth the work that God has done, you know, but I'm convinced that I'm going to see people in heaven. And I'm like, you here? It's like, how about you rejected everything I said?
I was just going to add, as a woman, I have a very motherly nature about me, and so it's very hard for me sometimes to not nag and continually remind and like send texts and, you know, like just be on them. And so it's something that I have to kind of battle with. So I identify with your struggle. And sometimes it takes other people reminding me. Even in my own house, Parrish is great for that, saying, Heidi, I'm grown, I'm 21 now. You can't mother me the same way you did when I was 15 or 12 or whatever, you know. And so sometimes it takes those little reminders from the person you're discipling and just accepting that rebuke and being okay with it, like, you're right, I'm sorry, I was overstepping, and embracing that and accepting that, and then just taking a mental note of it so you don't continue to do that. But then trusting the Lord with the results also.
Over here. All right. This is personal question. So I mentor this young man, 14 years old. A lot of unrepentant sin. He's spiraling out of control. I struggle with how to react when I find out he stole something again and the police brought him home, or whatever else it is. So practically, like, how would you guys deal with 14-year-old unbeliever comes home again and has stolen something? Because I don't know how to react. I don't know how to maintain a relationship with him and not but yet let him know what he's doing is wrong, and I'm trying to ride that balance right now. So practically, how would you react to that?
So this is, I mean, I wouldn't quite call it a discipleship relationship if he's not kind of responding and so forth. But I would see that as kind of almost a parenting type role, guardian type role in his life. And so I don't know what kind of family he comes from, but I'm guessing there's probably not a whole lot of parental guidance, a positive parental guidance in his life. And then that's ideally what a child should have, right? A parent who, he doesn't write you, a father or mother doesn't write you off because you keep messing up. A father and mother, a parent, continues to walk with you until adulthood, right? And even through and beyond. And so it seems like God has given you a special heart for this kid and put you in his life to be a source of that. And you get to exercise unconditional love towards him. That you've stolen, but there's forgiveness. You've done wrong, but there's grace, right? And letting him see the gospel, even though he may not understand it right now. As he continues to develop, he's gonna know it more and more. And again, you just never know what God's gonna do with that down the road. So, and we can't do that with everybody, right? We only have so much capacity. But I'm sensing that God has put this specific kid on your heart. And so I would say you continue to do that as long as God has burdened you for that. And as long as he invites you in that role in his life. It's hard, again, because we want to control. We want to save them. We want to rescue them from wrong because we know if they do this, this is going to happen, right? They can end up in jail, they can end up dead, they can end up with a record, that they can't get a job now. But at the end of the day, God is God and we're not. And so as much as we can, we love and we serve. And again, we express that affection, right? The prodigal son story. The father is waiting with open arms. When his son comes back, and he doesn't wait for an apology. He doesn't, wait for an explanation. And we never know the end of that story either. Like it could very well be the prodigal son after that party went back out into the world. We don't know that, but the father was still there for him and loved him.
I was just going to say he might have to hit rock bottom before he realizes, before he turns his gaze upward. But he'll know who to turn to for those questions that he's having if you're a continuous presence in his life.
All right, one more quick response.
Hi, I guess my question, I'm going to try and simplify it. It relates to what you were saying earlier. How do you properly disciple someone when you're still working through your own wounds? I'm going to use myself as going through the same thing. I mean, I know about the gospel. I know that Jesus is a father to the fatherless, but when it comes to helping someone else work through that, as I'm working through it at 22 years old and learning about the power of forgiveness, how do I start with that process essentially?
That's good.
That's a good question. What I found in ministering to others, walk with other people, that more than the growth that happens in their lives, there's growth that happens in my life. That God has a way of bringing me somebody that I need in my life to challenge me in ways I need to be challenged. And so a lot of times we can just let wounds fester and just sit there, right, until they blow up down the road. And God could be bringing someone who, again, is dealing with the same stuff you dealt with, and it forces you to deal with it head on. And so I would look at that as a gift from God. Okay, I guess I got to deal with this in my own life because I need to help this person walk with it, right? And there's something beautiful about, again, as it was said before, is us being broken before those we're discipling. We don't have to look like we have it all together and act like we have it all together. Man, that's hard for you to forgive that person who did this to you. And to be honest, I'm still working on that myself. You know, my father did this and that, right? And God's still working in me. And let's spend some time praying. Let's spend some time looking at scriptures, you know, over this. So.
Can you say an encouraging word, just a final encouraging word that you wanted to say to believers who might feel like they're just struggling in making disciples?
Joe will have a perfect word, because he struggles all the time.
I do. I don't like Brian. I'm just here to be nice. It's something that I've been learning this season is, the 3 C's of any relationship, I guess you could say, would be like Christ, communication, and consistency. And you need all 3 of those things for a relationship to thrive. It's Christ, communication, and consistency. And so I'm a traveling artist, and one of the things that's caused a huge barrier right now, especially as of recently, is I'm inconsistently at home right now, and it's a burden to me. And I've been spending time in prayer and counsel, like, okay, in this season that's coming up, I have to make plans to be consistent in order to, for everything in my life, but specifically making disciples. I got a pass sort of when I was in, for the good part, when I was in Chicago, because one of the guys I was discipling was flying with me all the time. I was able to take him with me on the trips that I was going to. That helped a lot. We spent a lot of time together, and I don't have that luxury right now. So I've been building with dudes at the basketball court. It's been like the most consistent place I can be with unbelievers is whenever I'm in town, I'm at the basketball court, and I've got names and guys that I've been like, hey, let's shoot around. Let's not just play ball. Let's shoot around. So just trying to be consistent. It's like trying to be consistent, but I want to be more than that. So like whatever you're endeavoring to do when it comes to making disciples, when consistency is like, it's just huge. It's the reality of you need Jesus, you need Christ, and you need consistency. So whatever you're going to do, just like plan it in your head, plan ahead of time, like whatever my schedule looks like, I'm going to consistently be in this person's life. That's the only way they should be able to really have an impact in their life, and be able to have, for when they do come back around, to be able to have a voice. Because if you're not there consistently now, and they go away and they want to come back, they're not going to come back to you because they're going to be more consistent. So be consistent.
Hey, can we say thank you? Give it up for these guys coming all the way from Chicago.